We should never underestimate the Chinese Communist Party's efforts to influence America's most senior leaders in ways both public and not public. They work on governors, they work on city councilmen, they worked on Congressman Eric Swalwell. We know they had somebody working in Senator Feinstein's office. This is a full-on effort to undermine the way we live here in the United States, and every leader, from the president on down, has to confront this in a serious way.
What is China up to? Are we supposed to really believe that COVID started in a wet market, that TikTok is just a fun app for kids, and this high-flying big balloon was just checking the weather? Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is with us tonight. He was also director of the CIA for a period of time during the Trump administration. Mr. Secretary, thanks so much for joining us at this timely point in history.
Doug, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
You know, there's so much confusion reigning about at this time over this balloon overflight. We're hearing just a variety of things, and we are living, after all, in this age of disinformation and misinformation. So I'm really happy to have you here as a former CIA director, especially to help shed some light on this. Let me quote from a piece that Byron York wrote this morning in the Washington Examiner, because it encapsulates so much of the confusion. He says, quote, "First, they sought," meaning the Biden administration, "they sought political cover by claiming Chinese had overflown the U.S. 3 times during the Trump administration, and nobody did anything about that at that time. Then, when a chorus of high-ranking officials of the Trump years, including yourself, said that with one voice that simply it did not happen, the Biden team responded with an explanation that strains credulity," end of quote. To elaborate on that a little bit, we heard just recently this morning from John Kirby, who said that they only recently discovered after the end of the Trump administration that there had been these 3 overflights of the U.S., or at least portions of the United States. But he wouldn't cite how they know that, apparently because of confidential or secret information. What's your take on that?
Well, first, we should know that the Chinese are lying. This wasn't a weather balloon. This wasn't just a observational balloon. They were attempting to do 2 things. One, gain information, signals, information, images, and the like. Second, we should note that they now know that they can penetrate American airspace and hover over it for days, and the Biden administration is unlikely to do anything serious about that. As for whether this happened before, I can say I was a CIA director for a year and a half, Secretary of State for 1,000 days. I was never alerted that there was a balloon over America 3 times the size of a bus collecting information against the United States of America. I would certainly remember that. I guess they're saying now that I didn't know, that our team didn't know. Fancy that. It will be interesting to watch as they try to continue to deflect and determine, was that true? Who knew? If the military kept it from the political leadership, that is indecent and dangerous. And if it actually happened and they did nothing in response to it, they're on the hook for that as well.
Well, that's sort of cutting to the chase right there. Somebody was tweeting, I don't know how reliable this is, that there's a possibility that Secretary of Defense Mattis may have withheld it from the Trump administration because he worried about Trump's shoot from the hip style. Any thoughts on that?
I suppose it's possible. Someone should ask Secretary Mattis about that, or the Biden administration should make clear that that's what happened. If so, that's really quite a remarkable thing for a cabinet member to do, to keep something that is that serious, right? By the way, I'd also be surprised. Remember, this gets disclosed ultimately not because the Biden team wants America to know or the world to know, but because somebody looked in the air, took a picture of the darn thing. So it seems unlikely to me that in the Trump administration, where the New York Times was only too happy to try and destroy everything we were doing, it seems unlikely to me that that news wouldn't have hit the global airwaves if that had happened on our watch.
Mm-hmm. I don't want to loiter on this point too much, but what would be the consequences of the military leadership withholding this kind of information from the United States political leadership, as you say?
Yeah, look, we did see during our time, there is no doubt about this, that we were operating against an implacable bureaucracy. Call it whatever you want, the deep state, the resistance. I saw it as Secretary of State. They were often trying to undo the things we were doing, but I never saw on something this serious. If it's really the same thing, if it's really a Chinese balloon transiting the continental United States, I never saw that kind of information kept away, or even anyone trying to keep that away from the most senior leaders of America. So I'll be deeply surprised if that turns out to be the situation.
You know, part of me hates to ask this question because we're living in the time of conspiracy theories, but at the same time, we're living in a time where a lot of conspiracy theories have proved to be true. So I'll ask the question, is it possible that the Chinese have so much, as the Russians refer to, compromat on President Biden through the doings of his son, Hunter, their access to laptop computers or whatever, that he is too compromised to push back hard against the Chinese?
Well, we'll have to see how that all ends up playing out. We know that there are emails that talk about 10% for the big guy. And we know that Hunter was doing business with the Chinese. And it appears now we know that then Vice President Biden was in some of those meetings as well. The reports are to be deemed true. But more importantly than that, there's a whole team around President Biden. All of them were working in businesses that were doing business with China before they came into office. I was sanctioned the day that I left office, not to sanction me. The Chinese Communist Party didn't give a rip about me. They were sending a message. Don't do what Pompeo did. Don't protect the American people. Don't protect American jobs. Don't protect American intellectual property. Don't close down the Chinese spying operation that I closed down in Houston, Texas. Don't do that. If you do that, you won't be able to make a living doing what you were doing before you came to office. We should never underestimate the Chinese Communist Party's efforts to influence America's most senior leaders in ways both public and not public. They work on governors, they work on city councilmen, they worked on Congressman Eric Swalwell. We know they had somebody working in Senator Feinstein's office. This is a full-on effort to undermine the way we live here in the United States, and every leader, from the president on down, has to confront this in a serious way.
It sounds like American industry needs to confront this too. I was looking at a picture the other day of the buildup of the Chinese Navy, and their new generation of destroyers looks precisely like the new generation of American destroyers. And that you could say that again and again about any kind of American technology or American military wear.
Doug, you nailed it. That's absolutely true. This is a full-on assault. There's no such thing as a private Chinese company. I think that notion, we don't get it here in America. We think, no, that's a private company and that's the government. Those two they're not separate. They call it civil-military fusion, but make no mistake about it, if you're buying something from China, you're buying something from the Chinese government. And we have not done the hard work to protect what you described, America's intellectual property. And the Chinese Communist Party has built their economy on the back of the American worker for decades. And there were no leaders prepared to stand up to that. We flipped the switch. In the Trump administration, we, for the first time, called out China on trade issues, on intellectual property issues, on dumping here in the United States, on espionage. All of those are elements of Chinese power. And it's going to take not only the United States government, but our private sector getting supply chains back in the right place to make sure that the American people aren't dependent on China when it is crunch time.
Many of you know that Secretary Pompeo is the author of a new book. Its title is Never Give an Inch, Fighting for the America I Love. I want to ask you about your book. There's some wonderful anecdotes in it, Mr. Secretary. Let me read one to you right now because I find it to be fascinating. And these kinds of anecdotes I find are very, very telling about what drives somebody, what their personality is, what their motivations are, and so it is with you. You write, upon your visit to North Korea, a secret trip that you took as director of the CIA, that nobody knew about, very, very few people in the administration knew about it, nobody in the media knew about it, very few people obviously in North Korea knew about it. You arrive on a U.S. Air Force plane in North Korea. You're greeted by one of Kim Jong-un's henchmen who tells you no weapons allowed. When you step off this plane, all weapons need to remain inside. You join a caravan, motorcade of Mercedes-Benz limousines. You drive to one of his palaces there. You meet the chairman, Chairman Kim Jong-un, I should say, in a grandiose setting there. The first words out of his mouth, Mr. Director, I didn't think you'd show up. I know you've been trying to kill me. You write, my team and I had prepared for this moment, but a joke about assassination was not on the list of things he may say when he greets you. But I was, after all, director of the CIA, so maybe his bon mot, his good word, made sense. I decided to lean in with a little humor of my own. Mr. Chairman, I'm still trying to kill you. Touche, Mr. Secretary. Great line. How did he react?
Well, thank you. He smiled, which was good. We were all heartened by that. I say we, it was myself and a fellow named Andy Kim, an amazing CIA officer. I wanted to make sure he knew we were serious. It wasn't about killing or assassinations. His joke wasn't about that either. It was him testing, trying to figure out, is this guy real? Is he human? Is he going to actually be serious about trying to figure out how to solve this incredibly difficult problem? And in the moment, I wasn't sure I'd gotten it right until I saw him smile and chuckle just a little bit.
But this is an important point. I talk about these kinds of anecdotes, and it's very symptomatic, indicative of your personality, and perhaps this present controversy that we're dealing with over the balloon right now. You have suggested that the Biden administration is risk averse. The President of the United States is risk averse. You have considered that to be a primary component of your personality and your style. Interesting perspective. You got to take risks in life.
You do, and they should be measured risks. You should do the hard work to reduce risk. No one's out there cowboying this thing doing crazy stuff. But the balloon is a great example. The Biden administration has said, boy, we thought there might be some debris hit a human being. Fair enough. No one wants that. But goodness gracious, if the Chinese were stealing us blind, if the world was going to see we were weak and we might lose thousands of Americans as a result of Chinese provocations that continue, then the small risk that you might have someone injured as a result of taking the balloon down over a sparsely populated place ought to suggest that this is an action that one should take. We are constantly, especially in America's most senior leadership positions, there's no easy ones. There's no layups. Everybody's already picked off the little lay-ins. All the tough decisions get to the most senior leaders in America. And so you have to be good at evaluating risk and prepared to accept that risk. And when you get it wrong, holding yourself and your team accountable for that failure. I think that's one of the hallmarks of our time for 4 years, was that when we got it wrong, we acknowledged it, and we continued to work our tail off to make sure we delivered on behalf of the American people every day.
This risk aversion, one could argue, and you do argue, infiltrates the Biden administration as it did infiltrate the previous Obama administration. You write of your predecessor at the CIA, Secretary John Brennan. Brennan has publicly admitted he previously voted for the Communist Party USA, and he was a de facto commissar of the progressive movement as director. Rainbow lanyards, meaning ID tags with the lanyard around your neck. Rainbow lanyards, check. Diversity and inclusion, bullet points in nearly every slideshow deck, check. Support for the terrorists in Palestine, check. Raise climate change to the #1 intelligence collection priority, check. Despite being a career CIA officer, Brennan was wildly political. And this goes on throughout the entire federal government now, correct?
Sadly, it does. Get the politics out, especially at a place like CIA. These are some warriors. They want to put a knife in their teeth and swim the river and collect intelligence so that we can all be safer and our kids and grandkids can live the same way that we have. To think that you're going to reprioritize an organization like that around a progressive political agenda is deeply dangerous. You'll forget that there is always risk, that perfection is virtually unachievable in the world of espionage. And when you don't train and work and focus on the mission, you aren't reducing risk because you're staying in your little cubicle doing nothing. You are increasing the risk that someday, somewhere, we're going to have to send American kids to fight and risk their lives.
You said at the start of this interview that despite all the banter about this balloon overflight, or all the memes that have surfaced on the internet about the balloon overflight, that this is now a dangerous time and that we stand at an extremely dangerous time in history. Explain that in a few seconds, if you could, because we're basically out of time here.
Sure. Weakness is provocative. And Reagan had it right. It is important that we never forget that we must win and they must lose. Those two central ideas animated everything I tried to do as CIA Director and Secretary of State. And when you get those wrong, if you think that strength is going to provoke and you're constantly allowing your enemy to walk all over you, you will do things that end up risking the very foundational ideas, our Judeo-Christian tradition, right here at home.
Do you plan to take that philosophy into a run for the presidency of the United States?
Oh, goodness. Only time will tell, and only the Lord knows. Susan, my wife Susan, and I are praying. We're trying to figure our way through that decision here in the next handful of months.
Okay, so the next handful of months, we'll keep our eyes on that. Thank you very much, Secretary Pompeo. Really appreciate your
sounds great.
perspective. Thank you very much for your time.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. So long, sir.